Tony, thank you so much for coming into the podcast once again. And obviously, we do this together. We teamed up so we can create this podcast together. But today is a very special day because you are a master practitioner in NLP. And I have many questions that a ton of my clients have asked when I mentioned the word NLP here in Germany. So what better or who better to explain this and to get these answers from than you. So thank you so much for volunteering and letting me do this because I think many people are going to benefit. So Tony, before we even begin with tons of questions that I have for you, give us a little introduction. What do you do over there, who you are, and so on?
My path has been quite mixed over the years, but I would say in the last 15 to 17 years, I've mainly been focused in the area of coaching and training with NLP or meta NLP from neurosemantics as my base, basically. I've lived and learned and continue learning about NLP because the field is developing. And what I found basically is that as I do this coaching and training, for me, fulfilling is when people kind of just realize more about who they can be by knowing the skills and tools of what we bring to them, basically. And that's really why I love doing it. Long story, cut it short. My first exposure to NLP was with the Tony Robbins weekend workshop where you walk on fire. And I got there by winning a lucky draw. And going there, I had no expectations, no pre-information about what it takes to walk the fire. But I went there Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Friday night was the first evening, and we started walking the fire. And of course, Tony Robbins prepped us to do that. But over the weekend, we went through a lot of different, interventions and learnings. And what really caught me was how it was so transformative for the people around me. Some were just, bawling and having their own realizations. Some people didn't want to walk on the fire. Very few of them, by the way. Most of them did. I did too. So I had to find out exactly what was going on. I didn't know it was NLP at that time. So after I got back from that workshop, I found out it was NLP. And as I did my research on that subject, I just realized one thing, and that's kept me in the business of NLP all these years. And the one thing was this, that the information was so clean and simple, and it was all about human subjective experiences and how we describe our experiences, how we code our experiences. And I just said to myself that day, and I can remember that day when I really had this realization that I said, if only more people knew about this, this would be a very different world. And that's when I committed to just spending the rest of my life since then. That was 2006 that I went for my first NLP training, formal training, that I was going to commit to this for the rest of what I can do.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I'm sure you have seen a lot of transformations in your coachings and in your workshops, which I'm going to ask you in the next few minutes. But first, you mentioned Tony Robbins. And as you were mentioning Tony Robbins, I couldn't stop to think about the movie Shallow Hal. Have you seen that movie?
Oh, yes, I did.
They were on the elevator, and then he did some NLP stuff, and he washed his brain, per se. I was thinking that, for example, here in Germany, NLP is seen as a manipulation tactic. Normally, salesmen use it, and people who are in the finance sector, all these sleazy people use NLP, or that's what many German people here think. So it has a really bad connotation for the most part. And I wanted to ask you point blank if NLP is actually a manipulation tool.
Okay, that's a pretty good question, because most people who are new to NLP came to find out, is it that or not? So what is NLP then, really? See, we all wired for survival and defense naturally. So we come from fear all the time. So most of the way we think, most of the way we learn and behave, we're coming from fear, and we don't know how to be positive. By natural habit and unconsciously, we operate from fear. To operate from love and from positive mindset, we have to learn it. The question is, what do we need to learn to get that kind of a mindset? Well, NLP is a field that really brings all of that together, because the founders who initially developed the practice of NLP, they managed to model expert therapists and all of the people who did, 3 people actually, who did the work. And when they decoded all they were doing, it was all about how we were coding in our minds all our different experiences, subjective experiences, the way we think, the way we feel, the way we speak, the way we do things. All of that was driven by certain thoughts in our mind, which NLP then eventually managed to code. So that's really what it is. NLP is a code on how to describe and think about our behaviors and our feelings and our emotions. Now, so it's a very powerful tool once you know it. Now, we know that any powerful tool, whether it's NLP or whether it's medicine or it's law or whatever, anyone who's got those tools can always use it for manipulation, right? So it's not about whether the tool is manipulative or not, it's about the user. Now, if you know that, then you want to be able to know the tools and skills of that field so that you will then be able to defend or protect yourself from that manipulation. Because, for example, we've got so many different stories in medicine and in legal fields, right, of how manipulation happened because the client was not informed enough, right? So in this particular case, we'd say that, because NLP gives you all the tools on how to, communicate, on how to think and how to, interact with people, then when a salesman comes to you and uses those tools, quote unquote, for manipulation, basically he's just using it without the intention of serving you. And that's what we call manipulation, right? When someone does something for you or with you without your interest in mind, but only their interest, which means that you need to be prepared for any place, for any kind of other interactions, not just NLP, that you need to be informed enough that you can know the distinction, basically. Yeah. So that's what NLP gives you, all the tools to be able to operate more effectively, communicate more effectively.
So what is the difference between a person who has no training in NLP versus someone who is trained in NLP?
Well, in the training of NLP itself, for me, when I run practitioner certifications, right, I do meet everyone who comes into the program prior to that to determine their intentions for learning the tool. Yeah. And NLP has, as a practice, has laid down the intentions of why we want people to learn the tool. It's a positive intention. It's not about learning to be able to manipulate people. That's number one. Yeah. So people who come in will realize that, okay, this is something I can use. This is something. See what NLP does is gives you the tools and knowledge to be able to think about how can you become the best version of who you can be. That's really what it's all about. So it models the way you think, it models the way you communicate, it models the way you interact with people. So it's the whole form of knowledge that you need to be the best version of who you can be. And we call it self-actualization.
Okay. So having said that, as you're saying that, what I'm thinking about knowing this tool and then being at an organization, let's say being at a toxic work environment. You're at this toxic work environment and you have these tools. How do these tools help you from not going into your autopilot or feeling those negative emotions and getting affected by that toxicity?
Okay, good question. I think, we just spoke about toxic culture and toxic environment the last session.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Right? Yeah. Now, when you have these tools, you are better positioned to recognize when toxicity occurs. Yeah. By the language people use, by the words they use, by the way they behave, by the way they express their emotions. NLP gives you all the tools to recognize where it comes from, a positive mindset or a negative mindset, or an intention to derail you or intention to support you. Now, without the tools of NLP, you may not have enough of the skill to make that distinction, right? So that's number one. And once you have that, then you know how to operate in a way that how you can diffuse a toxic culture. Because one of the key tools in NLP is recognizing how the way people think. We call them meta programs, but you can figure out the way people think because the way most of the time that we think is, in a sense, implanted by nature and nurture and the way we grow up, basically.
Right.
Yeah. The simple example is, why are there some people who are highly optimistic and there are some people who are highly pessimistic? Now, they're not choosing those kind of thinking by, choice. It's sometimes by default. It's the way they think through nature and nurture. But that still can be changed. Yeah. So once you can recognize the patterns, then you can recognize where they're coming from, and then you are able to adjust accordingly to move them from the negative to the positive.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. From your perspective, from your side, from the hundreds of people that you have taken through your coaching program and your workshops, are there any anecdotes that you have that you can share with us today of transformation?
Well, I remember a person who called me up for coaching, a senior executive in a multinational company, right? And she said, I need coaching because my bosses say I cannot go to the next level until I change my attitude. What's the attitude, right? She was deemed to be very task-oriented and not people-oriented. Yeah. So when I started coaching her, what came out was the idea that she does not like to build relationships with the bosses, because for her, building relationships with the bosses means sucking up to them. And she had such a strong personality, and she was a high-performing executive. Every year for 3 consecutive years under 3 different bosses, she was rated exceed performance. And yet they said they couldn't move her up because of her relationship building with the bosses, and she was not good at it. Because the frame she had was, I'm sucking up to the bosses. But during the coaching session, she realized that that's the way she framed it, and that's why she didn't do it. But when she reframed that and found that, hey, how can people trust and know me if I don't know them and they don't know me? As simple as that. And then she found some real frames on why she should build relationships. And during the coaching session, it wasn't also about just at work. It also, impacted on the family and her relationship with the husband, yeah, and family and parents also, yeah. So, by the time we finished the coaching session, her immediate boss said that, I don't know what happened, but she's already being recognized differently now.
Very nice. Yeah. Very nice.
Yeah. So that was for me, like, nothing better than to have someone at the senior executive level that could make that change. And I told the boss, I said, look, I was only facilitating the whole process. She did the work.
Yeah. Because there's a thing, right? The coachee and the participants, they have to do the work. And it's not something that they can just put in their brain like a software or something like that. They have to go through.
I can't implant it. Yeah. I can facilitate it. Yeah, but she made the choices and she saw the value.
Yeah, not yet. Elon Musk is working on that implant, but not yet. That's beautiful. But what about, and what about organizations? Let's say, have you worked with teams, and have you seen any differences when you're working with teams or organizations, not just individual?
I remember there was another multinational organization. In my conversations with the HR people, they said that for 3 years consecutive, the engineers in the company were complaining about their managers who never knew how to listen to them or communicate with them. 3 years consecutive, the same feedback came in. So they finally decided they needed to do something. So they called me in. I presented to them, a communication skills program. It was just a 2-day program, but core in NLP. And they put through about 100 of their managers through the whole program in different batches, about 25 people per batch, right? And as we expose them to the fundamental tools in that aspect, mainly about communicating. So they learn about how we code our experiences, how we use our language, how we build relationships, how we listen to people, and how we ask questions. And when they experience all of that, they realize that, we have not been communicating well enough with our engineers, So, during that session, when I do a modeling of the questioning technique, I remember there was one person that came up. He was the regional head of interior design of their product. And he said, he came up and said, I've got a problem. I said, so what do you want to do? He said, I can only do 2 major projects every year, but this year my boss has asked to do 3. And he was struggling with the idea that if he did 3, it's going to compromise the high quality work they used to do every year for 2 projects. And he got stuck in his mind on how to resolve this whole thing. And all I did was use the tools in NLP, kept asking him a lot of different questions from different frames, right? Mm-hmm. And as I did that, then he hit an aha on his own and say, I never thought of that. So, one of the strongest tools in NLP is the skill of asking questions. But of course, to be able to ask questions, you need to be a good listener too.
You need to be present.
Yep. And to build that relationships, to be able to ask those hard questions.
Yeah. And that is the key, to build that trust, build that trust so that you can really bring the topics on the table, to put the topics on the table.
So if you look at NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, so the neuro is our nervous system, our neurology.
Yeah.
Right. And it's connected to our mind and our brain. So every time we think about things, we pass it into our neurology. And how do we then code that thinking? We use language linguistics. So we use language to translate the way we think into our neurology, and the way we make meanings, and the meanings that we make, we put into our neurology with the language that we have. So the neuro and the linguistics, then the meaning and the language we use drives our behavior, which is the programming. So NLP is neuro-linguistic programming, means the meanings that we make and the language that we use to make those meanings together drive our behavior. Which means that if you want to change your behavior, you got to learn how to change the language and the way you make meanings. And that's what we mean by how we have been able to code the way we make meanings and the way we use language differently, so that we get more resourceful and come from a point of love and not fear. And then you get resourceful behavior.
Beautiful, beautifully said. And Tony, what does your work look like? Give me one second. Okay, I'm going to put what we just talked about in the beginning, because we didn't define what NLP was. I'm going to put it in the beginning. Okay. Tony, and since we have been talking about your clients, what does your workshops look like? Well, what does it look like to be in one of your workshops or to coach with you?
Yeah, good question, that, Jerry, because, you can talk about NLP all day long, but if you don't do it, nothing's going to happen. So practice of NLP is highly, highly experiential. So when I run a 2-day workshop on communications, most of it is doing the exercise, learning the information, of course, and then getting the exercise done, essentially. As simple as, an exercise on listening.
What?
We think we listening. Right? How often that we hear things, people say that, I didn't say that, but the other guy heard it. Yeah. And sometimes the other way around, you didn't tell me that. Sometimes we say in NLP that, your message cannot get across until you've told them 7 times.
Yeah.
But the one rule or principle as far as listening is concerned and communicating is concerned, I have all this while, is I hold true, is this: the meaning of my communication is the response I get. So no matter how I communicate, no matter what intention I have used to communicate, if the response I get does, it tells me the meaning they've made about it. So which means I have to change my communication.
And when we talk about communication, I know we have been focusing on words, but as you're saying that, I'm also thinking about that sometimes you communicate the right words, but your body says something totally different. And then the client or the other person picks up on that cue of the body, even though they cannot tell what it is or they cannot really explain it, but it creates a feeling in them that gets you the total opposite of what you were looking to achieve.
Yeah, that's a mismatch, a dissonance, we call it, right? You can't hide what you're thinking, really. It will show up in your body language. It will show up in your emotion. It show up in your tone of voice. Yeah. So while the words may say something, but it's got to be coherent with the body language and the emotion. And that's what you learn very clearly in NLP. That coherence has to be there. If there is a mismatch, that's a signal that, hey, wait a minute. It doesn't mean whether it's right or wrong. It's about, I need to ask a bit more about what's not working here, what's not coherent here. Yeah. So, that's fundamental tool in NLP, being able to discern that.
And obviously not everybody at organizations, since we're talking in a business context here, not everybody knows NLP or knows how to use these tools. What do you think that they are missing or not being able to create in their careers because they don't have this awareness?
Well, you heard of Marshall Goldsmith, one of the top coaches in the world, right? He does a lot of coaching all his life, and he says the biggest issues or concerns always popping up with organizations and with management teams and with people is poor communicating. For sure. And from your experience, Jerry, I think you also see that, right? It's always about that communicating not happening, basically. Now, how do they learn? There's so many different ways of learning communicating, but what we do in NLP is get down to the very fundamental way that we think and we make meanings and the way we represent our expressions, right? A simple thing like, we use our 5 senses to experience anything that happens between us and our colleagues. Yeah. And some people are more visual than others, so they rather see rather than hear. Some people are more auditory inclined, so they'd rather hear. So when sometimes when you work with your colleagues and your colleagues say, hey, let's talk about this. And if you're a visual person, you said, why do we need to meet? The highly auditory person wants to meet up. Yeah. Now, if you don't know these little differences and nuances, then you're not very sharp at how to build that relationship and communicate effectively. But, that's how we normally communicate. Some are more visual, some are more auditory, some are more kinesthetic, some are more the thinking type. Yeah. So you learn all to make all these distinctions. If you know distinctions, then you know how to engage them at that level, and you got to meet them where they are and then take them where you want them to go.
Yeah, I think at the workshop that we just did this past week, we had the attendees come to the conclusion that it's not about communicating the way I like to be communicated with or to, but about communicating in the way that the other person likes to be communicated with or to.
Right. So, yeah. Otherwise, they won't be able to hear you.
Exactly, because it's 2 different wavelengths, right? So
exactly. Yeah.
Having the awareness by using NLP, then it is more possible for the other person to hear you the way you want to be heard, because now you are generating conscious communication or designing it in a way and packaging it so that the person can receive it and like it, right? It's like you want to give.
Today the awareness is today the awareness is even more important because we have very quick ways of communicating, WhatsApp, Viber, all those digital communications, right? And we shorten the language even.
Yeah.
Right. So if we're not kind of alert to the nuances in those languages, and you interpret it the way that you want to interpret rather than the way that the other person meant, and you don't ask for clarification, that's going to create a lot of issues. And, sometimes one of my clients told me that, in the younger people prefer to communicate digitally rather than speak, right? And she said that even in a critical situation, he just said, I sent the message already. But it was so critical, he needed to call that person and he didn't. Yeah. So for me, when I communicate, with people digitally, either mainly through WhatsApp in our place in Malaysia, right? Yeah. I fully notice exactly the words they use in that text, and I will use the same words. I will avoid using any new words that they've never used before or something like that. If I do use different words, I got to make myself very clear. Like, just now when you send me the text that 14:30 update, right? You don't have internet access. And I thought, hey, wait a minute, it's only 13:30, but you're telling me that you don't have internet access at 14:30. But what you meant was reschedule to 14:30. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So, we shortcut our messages, but I only realized later that, hey, wait a minute, he meant reschedule to 14:30 and not that he didn't have internet at 14:30. Yeah.
I'm looking for the message right now. Hold on a second. I'm looking for the message.
Yeah.
I have my daughter
and
here.
Of course, the other part I realized also was that, as I reflected on the message, then I realized that, okay, the other part, that the other layer that came in was this, that, there's a level of trust you got to have in communicating.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I said to myself, look, Jerry is not the kind of person to make that kind of a mistake. It's 13:30 and he's telling me he's got doesn't have internet access at 14:30. That can't be.
Yeah.
So that's how I then switched and realized that you said reschedule to 14:30.
Yeah. So, but this is good communication, right? So I'll read the message here for the people who can I say it. It says update 14:30. I don't have internet at X. I was at a company, and I need to go home to do this interview. So yeah. So that was the update. It's interesting that you say that, because when I do that, it's normally because I'm with the client already. Let's say that the client went to go get a coffee, so I don't have time to write down everything specifically. I'm like, oh, he went for a coffee. Okay, hold on a second. Update. Here we go. So I
exactly.
would hanging.
Yeah. So you can see how that miscommunication can happen, right?
Happen.
Yeah. So, I would say you learn in those situations when it's really critical that we should move from digital to just calling up that person, which you did later on, right? Which is pretty good. And that's what I already recommend my clients all the time. Look, don't get caught up with digital communication, because, you do that all the time without clarifying. And then with a critical situation, connect with the voice. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And also think about what you want to say before you say it, because now that I'm reading the message, I could have wrote it differently, even shorter. Maybe update, let's start at 2:30.
Yep.
Instead of 2.
That's it.
Let's start at 2:30 instead of 2. No need to tell you that I don't have internet. There's no need to tell you that. So
yep, exactly.
Yeah. So it's interesting also that when you are it's good that we're dissecting my communication, right? Because when you have time to think about it, then now that we're thinking about it and we're analyzing it, it's easier. It's like when you write an email and you don't send it. So for example, I don't send emails right away. I just write them and I don't send them. And then I come back 5-10 minutes later and I read them and see if they are accurate or if they are clear, if they're concise and they're friendly. So but when you have that time, but when you don't have the time, and that's when I guess NLP is very important, is for when those times come that you don't have the chance to do that you're already operating on autopilot in the NLP way, so you don't default back to programming. So get
back to the fundamentals. Yeah. it's all about meaning and performance or behavior, right?
Yeah.
Every behavior and performance we execute, and what is behavior? What we think, what we say and do is behavior.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the programming part. Then the meaning making part is based on how we think and feel, right?
Yeah.
The way we think and feel drives our meanings. Yeah. And then we use language to formulate or code the meanings, basically. Yeah. So when you get down to, okay, we say it's NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, but actually what it means really is that think about the meanings you're making and how you're feeling, because that will translate into your behavior, which is what you say and what you do.
Yeah.
So NLP is the language of coding all of this so that you become so alert and aware that whatever communicating you're doing, you already know there's a meaning behind it and there's an emotion behind it, and it will result in a response, which is what people say and do.
Beautiful. Beautifully said. Tony, and where can people find you? So if people were to find you, people who are listening right now or viewing this on YouTube, how can people find you?
Well, I think first I can, because I'm in Malaysia and you're in Germany. Yeah. So can find me on LinkedIn. Yeah. And definitely you can, LinkedIn, I think I have my email there. You can contact me with the email, and we can always post my mobile number. No issue with that. Yeah. But of course, there's a 6-hour difference in time. Yeah. But primarily, you can find me on LinkedIn.
Great. I will make sure that I will put it right now here so that people can also see it. So
Yeah.
Tony, thank you so much for letting me interview you. Wait a second. So Tony, thank you so much for letting me interview you. This was very insightful from my side. I learned stuff about my text messaging. I have to update my WhatsApp strategy here, my WhatsApp game. And yeah, thank you so much. And I will see you on the next episode, my friend.
Yes, man. Thank you so much, Jerry, for this session.
All right.
All the best.
All right. Talk to you soon. Great.